Prefecture advertisements. Anime just loves doing them. And Let's Make a Mug 2 kind of has that feeling, but this is my review of this series, a series that aired in the spring 2021 anime season. So let's jump into it. Let's Make a Mug 2 opens up with Himeno, who has just moved to the city of Tajimi, which is in kind of the southern parts of Gifu Prefecture in Japan. And she has moved here with her father. Her father was a salaryman whose company that he worked for went under. And kind of an attempt to kind of change his life, he decides to move with his daughter back to the hometown of his wife, his late wife, and start a new cafe there and see if he can actually, be successful there. And essentially, as we follow Himeno as she goes to school, essentially the same school that her mother went to, you kind of slowly see her following in the footsteps of her mother as we find out that this particular city is well known for its ceramics and different types of clay crafting that her mother actually was into. And as she joins the ceramics club, you start to see Himeno as she learns more about this craft and essentially more about her mother. And she's of course joined by a pretty crazy cast. She has her neighbor Naoko, who's kind of more of a very much a silly type of character. She really does kind of play and tease into Himeno, and she often responds of like, that's crazy, what are you saying there? You also have this super hyper ginky girl named Mika, who eventually is the one that drags Himeno into the club. And she's very more artsy. She actually, in her craft of clay, it's more in the realm of creativity, not necessarily usability, but more just creativity and art of itself. And then you, of course, have Tuko, who is kind of the more mature and more guiding type. She's very nurturing. She helps Himeno more learn the craft itself and all the intricacies of it. She's very patient and really good at teaching. Like I said at the very beginning, the big concern really with this series is how much of a kind of an advertisement of a district this really is. We do kind of see this a lot with things like Super Cub and even things like Layback Camp, where it does feel like they're kind of just showing off locations for the sake of advertising them. And yes, that really does kind of feel like the case here, but it really does more seem like a passion than anything. Whereas it does feel like this series is almost like a love letter to the craft of, molding clay and everything. As it kind of lays out, here's the kind of more prominent areas for getting different types of styles of clay crafting, where you would normally get certain objects made in Japan, and really the focus of the idea of how much is actually crafted and sold from this particular city. But even still, it kind of becomes more than just that. Yes, it's a lot of learning about how to make this stuff, and I did actually learn a few things, even though I'm pretty moderately knowledgeable in clay craft. It still had these little moments of like, oh, so that's how they do that, which was really interesting. And it's all kind of done in a really kind of playful and fun way as you kind of see these characters explore this concept and really kind of dig into the not exactly crazy detail stuff. We're not getting into some hyper detailed elements of temperatures and stuff, but it just gives you kind of a surface level that's just enough to be interesting and enough to go, aha, and that's interesting. I like that. But that's not to say that the story itself is solely focused on that. A lot of the focus is really around Himeno and her mother, and the relationship that she has with her father. And in those elements, I can say the series does have some interesting stuff to offer. As you see that she has unfortunately lost her mother, but you see her following the footsteps of her mother, and eventually that kind of sense that in getting into the clay craft that she ends up quickly loving, she almost kind of seeks a similar approval of her father in what she creates. And that kind of element of essentially the three pillars of mother, father, daughter, losing one of those pillars and seeing and trying to hopefully bring those two pillars together is where I really did like this series. And I did have quite a bit of, personal attachments and personal experience really kind of driving my emotions into it. But it was a story that was really well done, and I did find it not hyper deep, not hyper dramatic, but just enough to really kind of tell a really decent story. And driving that story is a decent cast. I did like a lot of the characters that were in this series. I think their chemistry was pretty solid. Not that anything really, groundbreaking happening here, but just enough to give it a solid driving force to really drive Himeno forward. There was some interesting stuff between the history of Mika and Tuko that was well enough told. And while we didn't really get too much of Naoko, I really did like her addition. I think that her ability to kind of tease Himiko was always fun. So yeah, decent series. I think it only being about 14 minutes per episode, minus the opening and ending, that's only about 11 minutes per episode. It's not too much of an investment. And I think it did a really solid job of kind of just having a pretty simple story with a pretty decent dramatic beat with the mother and the father. And then kind of, capping it out with some decent character moments in the end. But yeah, if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of this series. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the series or if you're going to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. I thank you all for watching, and y'all take care.